my channel. Welcome back to another video. I'm Jessie and you're watching Welcome to my August wrap up. In the month of August, I read a lot of books and I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm so excited to get into this wrap up. I've actually been putting this wrap up off because there are so many freaking books that I read, and talking about them is gonna be a task. Okay, so it's gonna be one hell of a video. But before I get into the wrap up, into the nitty and the gritty of all of the books that I read in the month of August, I have to give a big shout out to the sponsor of today's video, which is none other than Pango Books. Y'all may have seen my dedicated video where I tested out Pango Books. I did an unhaul, the very first unhaul I've ever done on my channel, Bow Ties and Books, and I took the books that I unhauled and posted them on the Pango website. So if you want to see that video, I will leave it linked down below. But I'm really excited to be working with Pango again because they are doing some big things. So for those of you who are not in the know, Pango Books is this incredible app where you can buy and sell books. It is accessible for both iOS and Android, and it is 100% free. Setting up an account was very easy peasy. Y'all know I am not good with technology. And I just absolutely love that right away you get to set up your tags so you can curate your feed. You can decide what kind of books you want Pango to recommend for you. So this app is really cool because you are buying books directly from the sellers themselves. So you're supporting independent readers just like yourself who have books that they know are better suited for other people, for a different home. It is so great knowing that I am unhauling books and sending them to a good home. After you sell a book, Pango sends you a shipping label directly to your email, and also you get to set your own price for your books. And Pango also has threads for you to communicate and chat with other readers. It just is an amazing app. I have been using it for over a month now and very much enjoy it. There are books that I like to track and keep my eye on. You can also favorite books. So if you're not ready to commit to buying a book just yet, you can like the book and, go back to it later, see if it's still available, etc. It's just so easy, so accessible. I love that it is user-friendly, that it puts the bookseller first. It's a really affordable way to buy books and a really good way to unhaul books. Definitely check out Pango. I will leave the link to my Pango account if you want to follow me and see what books that I'm buying and selling. Also, I will leave the links for you to download the app yourselves. It's just so great. So thank you so much to Pango Books for sponsoring this video. Now, without further ado, let us hop into the August wrap up. I'm going to get into my August statistics. For the month of August, I read a grand total of 18 books. 7 of those books were read in the audio form. 0 of them came from my local library, and all 18 of those books were books that I owned. Out of those 18 books, 2 of them were anticipated. I read a total of 5,237 pages with an average star rating of 4.1. I read 6 horror books, 2 nonfiction books, 1 science fiction fantasy book, 6 fantasy books, 2 contemporary books, and 1 nonfiction book. Let's just jump right into these book reviews because I gotta get popping, okay? We have to move this along because I have a lot to say about some of these books. One of the books that I read was Hide and Seeker. I believe that this is the debut for this author, and this is a book that was so kindly gifted to me by a subscriber. This book was gifted to me from someone who just identified themselves as a Canadian fan, so thank you so much for sending me this book that was on my wish list and I just had been dying to read. It meant so much that you sent this to me, so thank you, and I absolutely loved it. In this book, we are following a young boy who is really freaked out when his friend, who has been missing for a long time, suddenly reappears, and he's creepy AF. Something is off, and he wants to play a game of hide and seek. But when these kids start playing hide and seek, they get transported into this personal hell and they have to fight their biggest fears. This is a Black horror book and it is just phenomenal. It was so creepy and ooky and spooky. It's going to be a really good book for the upcoming spooky season, for the fall season. I'm so excited to read more from this author. I love the cover. I love the way that fear was communicated in this book. I just really enjoyed it. So if you want something that's like paranormal and spooky, I would definitely check this out. I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. It was great. I also finally got to read The Girl with All of the Gifts. Some of you may know this book from the movie, which is this apocalyptic dystopian film, zombie film. And I watched it well before I even knew about the book. And after watching the movie, I was so floored and interested that I, sought out the book, and I got it pretty recently. And this book exceeded all of my expectations. I had no freaking clue that this book was going to be so good, so much better than the movie. I thought that this was going to be the exception to the book being better than the movie. No, the movie was not better than this book. This book was so freaking good. So in The Girl with All the Gifts, it is a multi-POV horror book, and we are mainly following this girl named Melanie, who is kind of human but isn't actually. Melanie, while she is incredibly intellectually gifted, is also part zombie. And so when she smells saliva or blood, she goes into a feeding frenzy, and she is part of this. I don't want to spoil it. So she's essentially, I'm just going to call her a zombie. She's part of this zombie population that has ultimately decimated the entire world, has taken over. And so she's kind of locked in this compound where scientists are experimenting on her, putting her through grueling experiments. And the book is about what happens when she escapes. It is fantastic horror. It is great character work, but the science is what sold this book for me. The science is peak. It is just chef's kiss. So phenomenal. I was deeply impressed. The science made the story feel so freaking real. I loved Melanie. She's just my green bean. I just want to hold her, even though she would rip my skin off, and that's perfectly fine with me. My face isn't that great anyway, So in some ways we could argue that it would be an improvement. This is a book that I gave 5 out of 5 stars to. I have the sequel. It's floating around here somewhere. Best believe I'm going to be reading that, if not this year, early next year, because this author knows how to write a charged, just powerful scene. It was good. It was gory. It was actiony. It was smart. It was all the things. It was philosophical. You have to read this book. I really, really vibe with it. And the audiobook slapped. Highly recommend the audiobook as well. Obviously 5 out of 5 stars. And the next book that I have here is The Witch King, which y'all know we read last month in August for the non-binary book club. We had a live show. We'll leave that live show link down below. This is BookTube's baby right now. Okay, we are all cradling this book in our hands. We have, people are feeling some type of way about this book. People are loving this book. And so I was mad excited for The Witch King, because it is this dope debut fantasy by an Indigenous author. We are following a trans male witch who has escaped this kingdom he is supposed to be a part of, but he doesn't want to rule. He doesn't want any part of this kingdom. And in this book, he is essentially dragged back into this kingdom and has to become involved with his politics, as well as overthrow, the toxic government. And he's dragged into this kingdom, back into this politically charged atmosphere by his ex-friend, aka his ex-fiance. And he's having really complex feelings about this boy. It's just really intense. There's a lot going on. It is a very busy plot. And I have a lot of thoughts on this. So ultimately, I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I gave this book a 3-star, and it just broke my heart to do so. And not that 3 stars is a bad rating, but it's a low 3. Now, did I love the social commentary? Absolutely. I loved the notes about abolition and about multiple layers of oppression. I loved the analogies. I loved the politics in this book. The way that the author just did such a bang up job of using the fantastical in order to critique power structures in our world was brilliant. This author can really, really craft conversations and host social commentary in a way that is entertaining. They did such a great job. I just had issues with the romance between Wyatt and Amir. I honestly felt that Amir was allowed to get away with doing some things that were very non-consensual, very creepy, very fetishizey, just very not acceptable to Wyatt. And those were the same kinds of things that were being done by another character, an antagonist character. And the antagonist character was criticized for having done those things, but the protagonistic character was not. And it felt as if Amir was given a free pass for violating Wyatt's boundaries and challenging those boundaries simply because Amir was a good guy. And I felt that sent the wrong message, because good guys, good people still need to be held accountable for behaving inappropriately, especially on a sexual level. I talk about it so much more in the live show, and I also go into my other details that I had with this book. But ultimately, I see the love. I'm definitely going to read more from this author. I will be continuing with the series. I'm so freaking excited for the next book to come out, because yes, it will be another non-binary book club pick. 3 stars. The magic.
I had issues with the magic.
The world building. It did nothing for me. It did very little for me. It did nothing for me, let's be honest. I also read Vicious, V.E. Schwab, one of BookTube's favorite works, where we are following 2 boys when they begin their college career. They decide that they want to develop superpowers, and they do, but in the process they end up becoming villains, and they have this 10-year duel between the 2 of them, this 10-year freaking battle where they're trying to plot and scheme and kill each other. It's a lot, okay? And I'm not going to talk about this book in any detail, because I read this for a secret video. The video is going to be out by the end of the year, but I just want to say that I read the book. I'm not going to give you my thoughts on it. I'm not going to tell you what I rated it. You got to watch the video when it's out, you know? I will say V.E. Schwab can write a story. I will say that. And then I got to read one of my most highly anticipated books of the year, of the century, of any of my lifetimes. And that book is none other than Son of the Storm by Suyi Davies Okungbawa. This book cleared my skin. Okay, this book laid my edges. This book healed my childhood trauma. It did that and more. I had such high expectations for this book, and I was worried that I was going to plummet to the ground, because sometimes you have hopes and dreams, and then, you end up rolling in a trash can down the side of a hill while all of your exes watch you. This book, though, okay, auto by author. I just want to hold it close and never let go. I want to do the opposite of what Rose did for Jack in the Titanic. In Son of the Storm, we are following a young boy named Danso, who is a scholar, but he is from a low caste in his society. When an ancient text goes missing, he is blamed for its disappearance and ultimately is banished and has to go on a quest to recover this text. And in the process, he may or may not discover some more secrets that threaten the whole of the empire. In Son of the Storm, we are following a young boy named Danso, who is a scholar, but he is from a low caste in his society. When an ancient text goes missing, he is blamed for its disappearance and ultimately is banished and has to go on a quest to recover this text. And in the process, he may or may not discover some more secrets that threaten the whole of the empire. I really, really loved it. I loved the world building. I loved how political it was, and the amount of detail and care that went into both the characters and the caste system. Definitely incredibly freaking well done. The descriptions were so vivid. The centering of West African culture and storytelling methods was on it. I enjoyed the fight scenes. I enjoyed the character work. Yes, there are some characters that I don't care for, but that is always going to be the case. There is one character in particular, one of the main characters, that I feel is just a little flat, but it's book 1 and we have time to grow. I tend not to rate book 1 too harshly until I get to read the other books. Obviously, book 1 is not going to have the full story, so certain things that I know have the potential to be expanded upon in the future books, I will not criticize, if that makes any sense. The writing was so good. The way that the author writes about conflict and the ways that the author crafts a story, the transitions, just all of it was so good. I will say, I was talking with one of my buddies, and she was saying that the Red Eber is a bit overpowered. And I can definitely agree with that. However, we don't know, even in the book, like, we still don't know anything about the Eber. the Ebor. And so we can't really say if it's overpowered or not because it hasn't been explained yet. And there's still plenty of time for the powers of that to be explained. One critique is definitely that one of the characters who gets their hands on this stone suddenly masters it within like 3 seconds. And I think that that's a valid critique. It didn't bother me personally because of reasons that I'm just not going to go into. I liked the flow of the story. I liked the way that everything happened. I had zero criticisms for this book. Eshime, I just don't. Look, I loved Eshime at first. I loved having this cutthroat, bloodthirsty, power-hungry Black woman character, but she kind of fell out of favor with me as the book went on. She kind of went in a direction where I was like, all right, girl, you might need to be defeated. Let me know, other people who read this book, what you thought of Eshime's character, because I want to root for her on principle, but I'm just not as fascinated and impressed by her actual character as I would like to be. I just don't think that she's cunning enough. I think that she's way too impulsive. I think that she allows her anger and her pride to get in the way of healthy, intelligent decision making. And that's always the point where I just lose interest in a character. So I would just love to know, y'all, please, if you've read this book or are going to read this book, I'm gonna need you to comment down below because I would love more people to talk about this book with. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I also read some short fiction, graphic novels. I read Isola, which I had been meaning to read for quite some time. In Isola, an evil spell has been cast on the Queen of Mar and she turns into a tiger. The captain of her guard goes on a mission in order to reverse the spell, and this comic book is about the journey. And I absolutely love the journey trope, especially with an animal guide, a mythical guide of any sort. It's just the type of story that really hits my soul. I loved the artwork. The artwork for this book is so impressive. The ways that the world was built was simply just on a visual level so stunning, right? Just absolutely incredibly, remarkably beautiful. Gorgeous use of coloring, but I didn't love the storytelling. I was very disengaged for the comic for most of it. And despite that there were just these phenomenal spreads, I wasn't into the story. I'm hoping to reread it, maybe giving it another go will be more enjoyable. I ended up giving it 3 stars simply because of how good the art was. Otherwise, it would have been a 2-star. We also have a new comic book favorite, and that is Coyotes. This is published by Image Comics, and it blew my mind. I finished it and then restarted it immediatamente. It was that good. In Coyotes, women are going missing in this border town in the desert of Mexico. We are following a 13-year-old girl with a katana blade who is fighting werewolves, and she lives in this city that is defended by women. Only women are in this city, and they are just killing things left and right. They are running their own organization. These are some bad mofos. I was so impressed. I love the abuelas. They were so freaking cool. I loved this book. It was so dark and disturbing and gruesome. I have not been picked by a comic this hard in a while. It was so good. If you like creepy horror comics, if you like creepy comics, you have to read Coyotes. It is amazing. And Latinx Heritage Month is here, so I'm gonna just need you to pick it up. It was so freaking good. 5 out of 5 stars. I cannot wait to get the second volume. Just like the art and the horror in this book, dog, woof, okay? It's just, I can't, and just look. Do you see? Like, these are like one of the abuelas. Okay, formidable, powerful, 5 out of 5 stars. And we also have Shy Willow. You know, I love my children's books. I do. I'm a baby. I love my children's books. They help me with my anxiety. I love looking at the pictures. It's just time for me to sit with my tea and enjoy a story. And children's books are important to me because they remind me of my roots. They remind me of how and why I started reading, and I will never give them up. I don't care what anybody says. I will never give up children's books. So I'm really glad that the publisher sent me Shy Willow. It is the cutest book. It's essentially about a little bunny that lives with agoraphobia. Bunny gets a letter from this child who is wishing for the moon, and the bunny goes on this this journey to bring the moon to this child, and it is so beautiful. I'm definitely going to be rereading this Obviously 5 out of 5 stars. I highly, highly recommend this book. In the month of August, also read Made in China. This is a memoir where we are following a Chinese girl throughout her lifespan. And as a kid, she was forced by her mother to work in a sweatshop, and she ultimately decides to call Child Protective Services on her mom. And the book is about what happens after that, the repercussions of her calling CPS on her family. This girl was treated horribly by her family, and it was really difficult to read what she went through. So definitely be mindful going into this book for child abuse. But I loved the conversations that she had about abuse and how it shifts depending on what culture you're in. Based on our different cultures, we all have different ideas of what trauma is and what it isn't, if that makes sense. The book isn't just about that. It is about so much more. Ultimately, it's about love and acceptance and what we deserve and what we are owed and what we are not owed. It gave me a lot to think about. I ultimately ended up rating it 3 stars. I honestly didn't enjoy the writing, but the story was so heavy hitting, so heartbreaking. I definitely couldn't give it anything less than 3 stars. I highly recommend that y'all check out this book. It is special and important, and it is very heavy. It will make you very angry or very sad, but I'm really glad that I read it. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about The Sweetness of Water. This you're definitely going to see in one of my favorite books videos.
What do I say about this book?
In The Sweetness of Water, we are following 2 brothers who have recently been freed of slavery, and they encounter this very kind husband and wife who live on a farm, and the white owners of this farm end up hiring these 2 men to work on the farm, and it's about how the community reacts to these white people hiring Black people just after the emancipation. And it's really interesting because essentially the big conflict here in this book is that there are white people who need work. And so they really resent that Black folk are building bonds with this white family and getting paid for their labor while there are white people who are not being able to find work themselves. And it's about the fallout, the violence, the reaction, and how all of these characters are tested. This is just one hell of a historical fiction novel. If this book doesn't win awards, I am going to be rioting.
I'm gonna burn it all down.
Yo, this book is phenomenal. Some of the most beautiful writing, gorgeous writing, really good character work. I cared so much. I cared so much about this book. I was really, really invested. The storytelling, look, Nathan Harris can have my whole heart and soul. I could not possibly have been more impressed. I wish I could have rated it this higher than 5 stars. Y'all, this book is so good, and it is really underhyped on BookTube. So if you're in the mood for some adult historical fiction, you have to read this book. And I'm not a huge fan of slavery narratives just because they were only kinds of stories about Black people that I had access to growing up. And so now I'm just in a place where I tend to lean more towards Black joy and like Black people who get to go on fantasy adventures. Historical fiction, serious historical fiction will always have a high place in my heart. But I'm not reaching for those books lately because I'm getting caught up in all of the really fun Black stories. And this is a book that I'm really, really glad I read. This is a book that is just, it's worth every penny. It's worth it. Please buy it. Please support this author. Get it from your library. Get an audiobook. Do whatever you have to do.
It's worth it.
5 out of 5 stars. And for Sapphicathon, I read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. I did a vlog for this. I will leave that link down below. This is the most disturbing, disgusting, twisted, sick, depraved book I've ever read in my life, and it's less than 200 pages. And I'm still not okay. This is a book about 2 queer women who develop an internet relationship, and it's a BDSM relationship, and things go a little too far. It's body horror, it's queer horror, and if you, think of the most disturbing thing that you've read and then multiply it by 10. If you want to see more of my thoughts on this book, I will leave the vlogs down below. I don't even know what to say. This book is sick. It's sick. And I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The last book that I have that I read physically was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I read this for my secret TBR my secret video that I've been working on all year, and I'm not going to review this book. I just want to show it and say that I read it. I read this and Vicious in 1 month. They were my first 2 V.E. Schwab books, and I'm so excited to release like the videos where I talk about them because I have thoughts. Also, in the Sabbatathon vlog where I read Things Have Changed Since We Last Spoke, I read Bruised by Tanya Boteju, one of my most anticipated reads. I have the cover and I don't know where the physical book is. It's around here somewhere, so I'm just holding up the extra cover because it's fashion. This is a roller derby story about this girl who's grieving the loss of her parents, and she struggles with self-harm, and she finds roller derby, and it's about her getting into it and developing a crush on this girl and trying to navigate being a traumatized teen while also doing a sport. And I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was good. It wasn't my favorite. I did not like it more than Kings and Queens. The dialogue was really funny. Tanya Boteju is so good at writing dialogue and conversations and making the story flow. That was 5 out of 5 stars. The depiction of roller derby felt very rushed for me. This main character goes from like never having rollerbladed to being good at roller derby in a really short amount of time. I think she spends a week practicing and then makes it onto this roller derby league. It was a little stretched. The roller derby aspect was a little rushed, but that's not the end of the world. That's not the end of the world. The big reason why I ended up giving this 3 stars instead of rating it higher is because there was a lot of cheesiness in the book for me. There were some things I just couldn't suspend my disbelief for. The arc of the main character, and I can't talk about it without giving spoilers. It was just like the character work. I didn't really feel, the character felt more of an archetype than an actual character, if that makes sense. She didn't feel believable. I didn't believe her. I didn't really believe the characters in this book. I didn't really believe in the protagonist, and that made it so hard to get into the story, and it made the story itself feel juvenile. But I think it's a great book. I highly recommend it. So queer and sweet, and it's got some really good themes and messages that I think especially young queer folks definitely need to absorb. I loved the kind of like the tackling of toxic masculinity in young queer girls. It was good. I also read The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics. This is a sapphic book that was just on my reading list for a very long time. It is historical fiction, and we are following this countess who is a widow, and she was married to just this awful guy for the longest time, and her paths end up crossing with this young, brilliant astronomist whose name I believe is Lucy. And she and Lucy start this forbidden, secret romance because of the homophobia and their inability to be out. And so they're having this romantic sexual relationship behind closed doors. And also Lucy is trying to make it as a scientist in a deeply male dominated field and in a time where women were not allowed to be scientists or not given space inside. So it was a lot of the book was challenging sexism and patriarchal norms, and it was really frustrating to read because of the things that these women had to go through. The romance was really good. It was believable. It was paced really well. It was smutty. It was great. I loved this book. I really, really did. A lot of people think that the book is slow, but I enjoy my slow historical fiction novels. I love historical fiction. I love a slow, measured story, especially if it's romance, and the science kept me engaged from page 1 to the end. It was really, really good. I enjoyed it. I think that it is worth the hype. I can't wait to get it in the physical. The cover is beautiful. The audiobook was really, really good. And there's so much about the story that worked for me. It's definitely a romance that I recommend. If you are going to participate in any of our Sapphic-a-thon, readathons, this would be a really good pick. Highly recommend, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I also read The Shuttering by Anaya Alborn. Let me know if I'm saying her name incorrectly, but I finally got to read some Alborn. This is a very noteworthy horror author. I believe that she is the top-selling horror author on Amazon correct me if I'm wrong, but her books are just renowned in the field of horror. And so I was really excited to get into them for the first time. So the Shuttering is it's a werewolf story, essentially. They go up to this cabin and there's a big storm. They're shut into this cabin, and the storm brings up these werewolves that have been in hiding for a long time and are just destroying the lives of these kids, okay? And it is gruesome and it is bloody and it's claustrophobic, and I love that setting that like you can't escape. There's no flight. You have to fight. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. It was fun. It was bloody. It was gory. It was a good horror time. And I'm gonna try and read all of Anaya's works because I read another one this month. I enjoy her writing. I think that her stories are like, they're fast paced. They make really good audiobooks. The audiobook was on Scribd and that's how I read it. And it was good. I listened to it while driving and it helped me get from A to B. It was a good time. I also read The Ruins by, I believe, Scott Smith. I don't know what his name is. This is a horror book about these college kids who are hanging out in Mexico. They're on vacation, living la vida loca, and they decide to go to these ruins to go search for a boy who went missing and his girlfriend. So they hear that these people went missing and they went, I know what's a good idea. Let's go find them. I'm going to do a dedicated review of this book because these were the stupidest people. Just the absolute, I have never had people make worst decisions in horror ever, to the point where there has to be a dedicated video because I'm gonna physically explode if I don't get to talk about how absolutely ridiculous these characters were. They had no regard for their lives. They weren't even trying to survive. I feel like they literally, there was a scene where they were dying left and right, and they eventually just went, funk it, and just sat down in the middle of the forest and just started drinking tequila. They're like, I don't care. The vines are gonna kill us anyway. We're being hunted. Who cares? Pass me a shot. Let's pour me a glass. Like they freaking killed me. I'm gonna do a dedicated review. That's all I'm gonna say about this book. There's thoughts. There's gonna be tea. It's coming. And the last book that I'm going to talk about in my August wrap up is none other than The Last True Poets of the Sea. I read this for Kayla's Buzzword, and which was last in August. So the Buzzword was last, and hence me reading The Last True Poets of the Sea. This is a book that I've wanted to knock off my TBR since I started on BookTube. When I started on BookTube in like 2018, I believe, this book was all the rage. People were raving about it, and I just never got around to reading it. So I was really excited to read it for Kayla's Buzzword, and I just didn't love it as much as the rest of BookTube did. So this is a story about a misfit whose brother attempts suicide and is institutionalized and recovering. The attempted suicide sends a catalyst where the main character goes on this journey to try and find the ruins of a shipwreck that their family was on way back when. And essentially it's about this kid trying to recover their roots and acknowledge their queerness and deal with their trauma. And there's a lot to the plot, and it is such a beloved story, but ultimately it just didn't grip me. I did love the way that water was thematic in the story. If you are a water sign, this is going to be a really powerful story. I loved that our main character was a teen who was messy. You know, she had a shaved head. She was gender non-conforming. She had a shaved head. You know, she did her own thing. She wasn't afraid to be herself in terms of how she wanted to express the way that she looked. She smoked, she hooked up, she had bad grades. Like I appreciated seeing representation for a teen who wasn't like a cookie cutter YA protagonist, simply because growing up, those protagonists I didn't relate to a lot of the YA protagonists, because even though I was a pretty straight-laced kid, it's hard to explain. It's nice to have a protagonist who is messy. I don't know how to explain it, but let me know, like those of you who are watching this video, let me know if you also have had that experience where as a kid you didn't relate to the YA protagonist because they were too neat. You know, they were too put together. I don't know how to explain. I'm explaining this so poorly. I gave it 3 stars. It was a disappointing read because I was expecting to just be so wowed by the writing. Everybody loves talking about how gorgeous the writing is in this book. And I'm not saying it's not wonderful. I 100% see exactly why the writing is so beloved. But it really didn't do very much for me personally, which was unfortunate because I really wanted this to be a new favorite. I thought going into this book that it would be a new favorite, which is why it was so disappointing that it wasn't. It just didn't resonate with me. The story, it just didn't work for me personally. But I do recommend the book. The audiobook slapped it. I think I got it from Libro FM. It was really good. 3 stars. And that's going to do it for this video. Please let me know which of these books that you intend to put on your TBR. Let me know if you had conflicting thoughts with any of these books. Let's disagree with one another. I'm down to have a conversation. I love hearing your opposing views on books. Out of the books that I loved and talked about in this video, if there are any books that are similar to the ones that I talked about loving in this video, please comment down below. Let me know what those books are so that I can add them to my TBR. And if you made it this far into this behemoth of a video, why don't you comment down below with the books emoji, the stack of books, because this was a big book stack, or you can simply comment books. Feel free to check out the videos that I linked in the description box if you haven't seen them. Stay safe, and I will see you in my next video.